All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the September edition of Wireside Chat. I'm Paul Whitcover, the Associate Dean of the Online MFA. I'm joined by my co-host, Melissa Hart, who's an instructor in the Online MFA, and our guest for tonight, Sidney Williams, who is also, as you may have guessed or know, an instructor in the Online MFA. So let me tell you a little bit about Sidney before we start. With the recent reissue of his vintage dark fantasy horror thriller Nelfs from the Macabre Inc. imprint of Crossroads Press, Sidney Williams has gained new attention for his Paperbacks from Hell era work. The new trade edition restores the original cover art from illustrator Richard Newton. Sidney is also the author of the Cy Reardon detective thrillers Fool's Run and Long Waltz from Crossroads Gordian Knot imprint. Cy is an ex-cop, ex-con, who takes an improvisational approach to his cases. Publishers Weekly praised the first book in the series, saying, quote, "This thriller come caper will keep readers eagerly turning the pages." Sidney's body of work includes vintage novels from Kensington Books and other horror titles from Crossroad, including Midnight Eyes, Dark Hours, and the Lovecraftian thriller Disciples of the Serpent. He wrote 3 YA novels as Michael August. Sidney's short stories have appeared in publications including Cemetery Dance, Hot Blood, Deadly After Dark, Under the Fang, Quoth the Raven, Love Among the Thorns, Cat Ladies of the Apocalypse, great title, Unknown Superheroes versus the Forces of Darkness, Dark Corners of the Old Dominion, and the transgressive horror anthology Deranged. His story Dark Sky Park will appear in the anthology Symptom of the Universe from Dark Moon Rising Publications. Sidney focuses on speculative fiction and short stories at SNHU. He taught in Full Sail's creative writing BFA program for 7 years and previously worked as a newspaper reporter and corporate marketing writer. A native of Louisiana, he now resides in Virginia, which is my home state. His novella, A Disturbance of Shadows, is coming from Crossroads Macabre Inc. imprint in 2025. And I believe that Melissa has put in the link to Sidney's website, sidisalive.com. So let's start there. What is the story behind your uniquely titled website?
Well, there are many Sidney Williams in the world. Fortunately, Sidney is a little unique. Williams, there are countless Williams. So Sidney makes it a little unique, but there's still quite a few Sidney Williams out there. And when websites were fairly new, SidneyWilliams.com was taken. A really dear friend of mine is a writer from Chicago now, Wayne Allen Salee. But Wayne's roots are in Kentucky, and a lot of his father's family are from Kentucky. And frequently he used to go down there, and Waverly Hills Sanitarium, was one of the sanatorium, was one of the most haunted places in America, and I think it is a haunted attraction. But Wayne was there just walking around when he was visiting family and taking pictures, and scrawled somewhere on the outside wall of Waverly Hills Sanatorium was the legend "Sid is alive," and so he snapped that and sent it to me, and I thought, this is great. I've got to grab that. It may have been about Sid Vicious, but I thought maybe they were talking about me, and so I nabbed that.
It's a great slogan for a horror writer, with its echo of the movie Frankenstein.
Yeah, and which is one of my favorites. So kind of a nice segue there. I've always joked, and I've not reserved the name, but I've always said that I needed to put it in my will that it would revert to Sid is dead when the time came. But I have not registered that domain. So
that's a great idea. Oh, I love it. Well, I mean, you could always put it on your tombstone as well. You could put them both on your tombstone.
That's true. That would actually, I need to work that stipulation in. Not morbidly, but just realistically, my wife had asked me for some songs to be played at my funeral, just to, kind of factor those plans into, all of the things you try to look ahead for. And so, maybe I could just work that in as well. But yeah.
If you had to choose songs for your funeral, would they at all be horror related? Would they be writing related?
Uh, I wound up with some disparate ones, but with that had meaning, in my life. I worked for a while, well, several years at a hospital system, and the hospital used for its commercials and everything used the tune to Simple Gifts because it was, nicely in public domain partially, but it's also very nice Shaker hymn. And so because I worked there for years, I'd asked for that as one of the songs. And and I, love Disciples of the Serpent, which you mentioned in the outset. The outset is, well, it's set in Ireland, but I love Ireland, Scotland, and that vicinity. And I had asked for Loch Lomond, or there may be another name for that, but for Loch Lomond to
Yeah,
be one of the
beautiful song.
songs. And there is a song from it's kind of an offbeat Sam Peckinpah Western called "The Ballad of Cable Hogue," and the song that's used as sort of his funeral song is actually on my list. Is really really great song, and the title of it is escaping me, but it has great lyrics about you know keep me in mind or whatever, and some nice imagery like to what tomorrow may bring. It might bring the taste of a bright berry wine. And I love that movie when I first saw it on late night TV when I was a kid. And so that was one. And the other is a song from Warren Zevon called "Keep Me in Your Heart," which was on his album that was written when he was had realized that his life was nearing its end. And my father passed away in some proximity to Warren Zevon, and we had chats about him. It's like Warren Zevon, Johnny Cash, and several great people died around the same time my dad did. And so when that album came along after my father passed away, I would listen to "Keep Me in Your Heart." And so, not a lot of horror, except that, Warren Zevon was actually quite a genre fan, and
Yeah,
he has a concept album that's very cyberpunk oriented, and then Transverse City, I believe, and then of course Werewolves of London and things
right,
like that. And
right.
so, and Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner is actually a very concise little horror short story
Well,
in the
he was
lyrics.
quite a good writer, In addition, his lyrics are very clever and often moving, surprisingly moving.
True, true. Ironic, but yes, a lot of depth there.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I need to get because it used to be my little logo on or my whatever little quote you can have on Facebook was from a Harry Chapin song, "Just Another Traveler on the Road to Kingdom Come." And I need to add that to my list.
Yeah.
And
That's a good title
yeah,
as
yeah.
well. So so s- speaking of a traveler, tell me a little bit about your journey as a writer.
Oh, it's something I really realized that I wanted to do fairly young, or I had inclinations toward fairly young. My father was never a writer, never really aspired to write. He could have, I think. He was in the Navy in World War II, and so saw the world at a young age. But even before that, he was quite a storyteller, and he had a few eerie stories. Like he went into a empty house, and this probably would have been in the 30s, and he found a lid off of some sort of large can, lid, and he sailed it into through a doorway and into another room, and he heard it hit the wall and fall and hit the floor. And then a few minutes later, it sailed back into the room. And so he turned around and fled. And he always told that story. And being the 30s and everything, it's not hard to believe that, what would have been called a hobo in those days might have been, a homeless person traveling, might have been in that, that old house and thrown it back. But so I guess it was in my blood. I say all that to say, I guess it was in my blood. And the earliest writing I really did was for whatever reason, I had, the inclination to tell stories. And my dad was reading me at a very young age, Poe and comic books and things like that.
All those bad influences.
All these terrible things. Oh, yeah, it was actually like a Whitman, the Whitman like that did all of the movie tie-in kids books. Well, they had a Poe collection, and in the introduction, it had a little bit of The Raven, and it had that Once Upon a Midnight Dreary, and just him reading that terrified me. And so that was some of the earliest, I guess, imprint of anything scary. And they read me The Gold Bug and some of the other cool Poe tales. Anyway, I would rewrite the captions in coloring books. I would have, they would have often a story in a coloring book in those days, and they would have their own captions. And before I'd been, I guess, to kindergarten, and I could make letters, but I couldn't write words yet or spell or anything. But I would come up with what I wanted to say. And my mom, who was a school teacher anyway, would spell things for me. And so I can particularly remember taking a Tarzan coloring book and telling my own Tarzan story by rewriting the captions. And so that's where it really started. And I also had the sense when old movies would come on TV and my dad would tell me that was somebody that had passed away. And it's when you're a kid, that's hard to process that, like, Humphrey Bogart is not living anymore, and yet you're watching Humphrey Bogart do things. But it struck me that that there is meaning in leaving something behind. And so when I was very young, I thought, well, maybe I would like to create and do things that will leave something behind. And so, just very early cognizant moments, I had the inclination to do some things along the storytelling lines, and kind of stuck with that as I went through school. And high school, I had a couple of teachers that were encouraging, that saw when there would be a creative writing assignment that I was was doing something meaningful with them. And so we can go into a lot of detail here, but I'll truncate some of this. But I will say that in college I took communication arts, which was the most writing oriented thing that my school offered. And they had a creative writing May term, they called it. So I took all that, but anyway, worked my way up from writing poetry and being able to finish a poem, and then finish a short story until the summer of my junior year. I wrote my first private eye novel and was able to finish it. And I was writing on a Smith Corona electric typewriter, and I was doing 1.5 spaces because that came closer to the amount of words that were actually on a book's page, so you kind of knew where you were because this was before word processors or anything. And kind of had a sense that I was on track word wise. And I wrote that whole summer, and right before summer ended and school started back, I finished my first private eye novel with a character named Benjamin Ross, and he was a reporter who had kind of run afoul of some things, and so had kind of segued into being sort of an unofficial private investigator, and that was the first thing I got at least finished. And I had a friend that read it, a little bit older friend, and he liked parts of it. And so my trunk novels were three Benjamin Ross detective
Okay.
novels. And then I decided I wasn't bringing anything new at that point to the genre. I was reading Ross McDonald, Raymond Chandler, John D. McDonald. I'm going, well, these guys have this, they have perfected this. And so I thought, but I like H.P. Lovecraft and Robert Bloch, and I'd encountered Ray Bradbury's scary stories, and so I started mixing a little bit of the mystery style plot with something a little bit scarier, and that became my first novel, uh, Azarias. And I wrote that and I sent it to a friend of mine that I was out of college by then. I was working as a reporter and, kind of doggedly forcing myself to keep writing. But I wrote that book or that novel. And I sent it to my friend and I thought, I've got three of these in the trunk now. This is going to be the fourth one that goes in the trunk because I was used to just writing and put him in the trunk. And she called me up and she goes, no, there's something here. You've got something here. And so that was the book I went out with, and uh, went initially to did the query thing, used Writer's Digest and Writer's Market religiously, and found my first agent, Perry Brown from Pima Brown Limited, uh, via Writer's Market, I guess, and they shopped Azarias around, and it went to Fawcett, and it sat at Fawcett for forever. And they sent it to Zebra, and at this point, Zebra was, had all of the skeletons on the covers and all, and went, I don't want it to go to Zebra. But anyway, they gave up. They said, why don't you write something else? This does not seem like it's going to fly. And I had seen Pinnacle books around by that point, particularly some by Edward Lee, who is, now kind of, I guess, kind of a notorious, extreme horror writer. But he had a book with Pinnacle, and I thought, okay, well, this is in line with what I, am doing. And so I had a collection of essays about Stephen King, and I read in one of those essays that he had found a publisher. I think it was for the book Rage or Getting It On, which he's pulled from publication now. But what he did was he wrote a query letter addressed to the editor of the Parallax View, care of the publisher. And so I wrote, it was Edward Lee's Ghouls, and so I wrote to the editor of Ghouls and sent my query letter in. And I must have included my newspaper office number and my home number. But anyway, I was at my desk one day. Anyway, and they sent that letter back. They sent my whole letter back with a note at the top that said, please send complete manuscript. And so I sent the whole book in. And I was sitting at my desk at the newspaper one afternoon, and Anne Lafargue, who became my editor, called me up, and she goes, "Hi, this is Anne Lafargue from, I think she said Pinnacle, but they were all under the Kensington umbrella, but I was not really quite aware of that." And Anne had been an editor for ages. I think she even edited some Louis L'Amour work, but she was new at Kensington, and she called me up and said, I'm editor here at Kensington, and we like your book and we want to buy it.
Wow.
And so that started it all, and kicked off my Kensington years and my paperbacks from hell era years and
Now,
everything.
what are the paperbacks from hell?
Paperbacks from Hell is a book written by Grady Hendrix. And it came out a couple of years ago, but he looked back at the 80s, really, even as far back as the 70s, I guess, 70s, 80s, early 90s, heyday of paperback horror and gothic horror and all that. It's a really nice big picture book. And he has many color covers. He did not use any of mine, sadly, but used some friends of mine. And it's quite a few pictures from Pinnacle in that era. But it has kind of touched off a little cult of collectors that want to own those original books. And we were talking about bookcases. My books are in a room off this doorway here, and I have many of those titles that I purchased originally because I was reading them to learn to write books and everything. But it has just kind of become a new heyday. And that led, I held it up earlier, but that led to Crossroad wanting to reissue this, particularly Nels, because they love the original cover art. And it's just become kind of a thing. And Nels is kind of sought after among others, but the original will sell for hundreds of dollars in some cases, and sometimes even some of it's algorithm generated, but then there are people out there that are shelling out. And I kind of some of the first awareness of it I had was a British writer who's more or less a contemporary of mine and ours really, but Mark Morris. I saw him post on Facebook. Hey, I think I may have a line on a copy of Nels. And he said, I touched base with him and I said, I forget what I even asked him, but he told me, he goes, well, there is this YouTube channel, and they just, are singing the praises of it. You have all these book vloggers out there, and they will do things like they will do videos where I'm about halfway through this book, and and there was a lot of different things, going on. I realized there's something going on here. And I think that was before even Crossroad approached me about, reissuing it. They had done an ebook, and the ebook had a really cool cover, but they wanted to get this art back. Of course, we had to find out who the artist was, and they had to contact, Anne Lafargue sadly has passed away. But when I was writing YAs, I wrote YAs under the Z-Fave imprint. And I the editor that I had for my YA novels is a senior editor there now, and so I emailed him, and because he had helped me jump through the hoops of getting the rights back a few years ago, because the contracts has expired and they didn't have them in print, and Crossroad was interested in reissuing them, and so I had some contact with him in the last 10 years anyway. But I emailed him and go, hey, we're trying to get like the we'll find the artist, see if we can get the rights, or if the publisher can get the rights. And he goes, oh, I don't know if we're going to be able to figure out who the artist was. Nobody is here now that was in the art department then or whatever. But they looked through some files and they found Richard Newton's name, and I was able to put him in touch with Crossroad, and Crossroad worked out, and I don't know, bartered or something, and got him enough compensation. The artists will ask for astronomical fees, I think, initially, and or as much as they were paid back in the day for because all this is a payday for the artists too, all
Right.
of the paperbacks from hell things. But anyway, it all worked out, and at least we're able to reissue Nelfs. And I have a book called Blood Hunter, and there was an artist named Brock Stedman who did that, and Crossroad was talking to him, and he was asking for a lot of money. I'm not sure if they've been able to work anything out, and it's sadly, his wife is quite ill, and so his interest in digging through his paintings and finding, one from a number of years ago, was probably not his top priority.
Right.
But been exciting, and again, Grady Hendrix, who has written many horror novels now, and kind of has a great following just for his novels, was at a convention I was at, gosh, back in March, and I was sitting with a friend of mine, a guy named Tom Lucas, at a convention table, and Grady Hendrix, was signing at another table, and he was, he was doing panels and things, and he wasn't always, in the dealer's room or whatever. And we saw him sitting. He goes, "Go take a copy of Nels and go talk to him." And so I got to talk to him about actually working in the era he had written about and everything. And so anyway, a lot of fun, and just a blast to have something that I worked on a number of years ago kind of become a phenomenon. It certainly illustrates that you don't control what what bubbles to the surface or whatever.
Right. But also the importance of like, keeping control of your backlist.
Very true. Again, you never know what's going to happen. And in fact, I I had written a number of years, and I had written comics and things like that. And I worked in marketing, as I've talked about, for the hospital system. And I almost by happenstance decided to get. Well, I had been interested in getting an MBA, and years ago had even corresponded with Vance Borgelli, who was the over the creative writing program. I'm from Louisiana, if nobody can tell from my accent. And over the MFA program at LSU, it was a guy named Vance Borgelli. And we corresponded, and I had thought, well, I'm going to either sell something or I'm going to go get an MFA. I was like 26, and 27, 28. And I was corresponding with him about, the hoops to jump through to, qualify for the program and everything. And I around that time, Azariah sold, and so I tabled, going back to school. And later, years later, I realized that Raymond Carver had always wanted to study under Vance Borgelli. Oops. But I was at a deal called Wordstock in Portland on vacation a number of years ago, and came up on a table for Goddard College, which sadly is closing now. But they started talking to some of the representatives there, and they had a low residency, both in Vermont and off the Seattle, on the Olympic Peninsula. And so I wound up getting an MFA, and my plan was to, do the MFA and write literary fiction. Start writing literary short stories. That was going to be what I, did after I earned my MFA and everything. And then Crossroad called me up, and they go, you have a backlist. We're starting a new press, and that segued into my backlist coming out and me writing new things, new novels for them, and that led to me working at Full Sail, and then ultimately led me to SNHU. And I always say that there's a poster, opportunity comes to those who are on the dance floor, and I have to always, I always try to tell students, put things out there, and you don't know what is going to lead to something else.
Yeah. How about we pull a question or two out of the chat? Do you have one in mind, Melissa?
I have many questions of my own.
Well, let's hear them.
Okay, Sidney. I think my biggest question is, you mentioned publishing in several anthologies, and I recognize many of my students in the chat tonight. How do you find out where editors of anthologies, whether they're looking for writers? Are there calls for anthology submissions somewhere?
There are, especially genre, but there are. I want to say there probably, there always have been things going on, but there are just many, many exciting things going on the anthology front these days, and there are a lot of presses. Um, there, there are, for whatever genre, chances are on Facebook there's an open call group. I know
Oh,
there's like an open call horror markets, open call science fiction markets. Some really great science fiction sites have gone away. There used to be one called Raylan that was a great,
Yeah,
yeah,
Raylan.
clearinghouse.
That was a
And
sad day when Raylan shut down. But
yeah,
I just put this in, diabolical plot submission grinder URL into the chat.
that's a great one. Horror Tree is a great source for horror sites. But some of it, and there, you can find everything from paid markets to token markets these days. Duotrope, which you do have to pay a subscription for Duotrope, but they are a great database of sources. And things happen different ways. I wound up writing a story for it was mentioned in the credits, the collection Unknown Superheroes versus the Forces of Darkness. Uh, is an anthology that was done by an artist. He had a co-editor, but he had liked my Kensington era stuff and wanted to include me. And he was including Jonathan Mayberry and Al going back is a writer from Orlando, is actually a dear friend of mine, but Al was included. And so I was, I got to be in this anthology with some great authors. And that was just because the guy had liked some of my earlier work. If you look back through like the old digest magazines and everything, you will see a lot of the same bylines like in Galaxy or, and uh, it's like, they would kind of hit it off with a market, I think, and then be in almost every issue or whatever. And so, if you find some editors that you have a rapport with, that can be very beneficial. And I prepared a few books to hold up here. But I was really happy with how my and it's almost Halloween time. Where am I here? This came out last Halloween actually. But it is from Camden Park Press, and the editor there is a editor named Lynn Worthen, and I sold a story to her actually a number of years ago now, and actually kind of segued to her, but I had seen a news story. I used to sit on my sofa and work when I was in Orlando, and they had like a morning news talk show, the hosts on the couch and everything, and it went a little longer, and they usually had a guy do it showing you something going on in Orlando, and so I would have that on either with the volume turned off or the volume very low. But they had a news story one day that this guy had tried to bury his boss with a backhoe, and I thought, well, that sounds like a Edgar Allan Poe story, for the modern era or whatever. And so once you get one of those ideas in your head, you have to do something with it. So I wrote this story called A Cooler of Craft Brew, which is, of course, like a cask of Amontillado, about this backhoe driver, and he's a Florida man, and anyway, it became a very Poe-esque story. And sometimes you just write them, and then you go, "What am I going to do?" And I started looking around at all of these sources like we're talking about, and I found a Poe anthology, that was in the making, and I sent the story in, or I think I don't know if I queried, I sent the story in anyway. The guys get back to me and they go, "Well, we're actually closing shop, but this anthology is going to be picked up by Camden Park Press. And so, I think I sent it on to Lynn Worthen, and that was my first sale to Lynn. And then we have kind of hit it off. And so she comes up with really cool, ideas like period monster stories or cat ladies of the apocalypse. And it's like we're talking about with the news story. Again, you hear one of those anthology titles, I gotta write something for that. And so that has been kind of a nicely rewarding relationship. And has not every anthology, but periodically she will come up with one that captures my imagination, and usually she likes what I come up with. So,
Sidney, and along those lines, let me pull a question out of the chat. In your experience, what's the best way to build a rapport with editors?
Be nice. Be what can I use in the words of explicit language? Don't be a jerk. we'll put it that way. But think even worse. Don't be the worst version of jerk. Nobody wants to work with somebody that is problematic or that is so entrenched in their perfect work that they don't want to polish or change something that the editor has a reasonable motive behind the request. And so if you find an editor that likes your work, the first thing is just write a really good story, or write to the best of your ability, and get an editor interested, and then just turn things around quickly if they have edits. Turn things. Be open to requests. My story for Cat Ladies of the Apocalypse is a story called The Witch of Washington Park, and editors' taste they may differ for each anthology. And so I had written one thing fairly long that Lynn liked, and so I kind of did the same thing with Cat Ladies of the Apocalypse, and I had the whole story it was a novelette, really, because she had a count of about 10,000 words, and so I had a little bit more that kind of wrapped the story up. And she came back to me and she goes, I really like this, but I want to cut this last chunk and let's just focus on this part of the story, and build everything up to and end it sharply. And so I go, I can do that. Why not? And so the big thing is just be reasonable, meet deadlines. If there's a deadline for turning something around, if there's a deadline for approving the contents, there will be a point where it's like, this is the table of contents. Is your name right? Is your bio right? And can you, get us that by, any changes by tomorrow? Do all of that, do it by tomorrow if they ask. And that goes a long way. And if they, like your work and want to work with you again, that improves your chances if they do more publications. I was working. I'm in Horror Writers of America, the Horror Writers Association. It used to be anyway. And there's a Virginia chapter that has gotten fairly active since I've been here. And Scares That Care is a local con here every year that raises money for 3 recipients each year. There's usually a cancer patient or burn patient. Brian Keene is instrumental in it. Some may know his name well. And
his wife, Mary San Giovanni,
teaches,
is an instructor here.
Yes. And we did a Wireside chat together once upon a time.
We did a Halloween one I guess that was about 3 years ago now.
Yes, it was. Yeah. But anyway, it could not be an HWA anthology, but there was a anthology that the horror writers in Virginia decided, let's write a collection of Virginia horror stories and just make it to benefit Scares That Care, because we all go there. Half of us met there. And why don't we do that? And so that was, a cool thing that happened. And Clay McLeod Chapman, who is, hot right now. Uh, Clay sent a story in, and a guy named Joe Madry, Joe just wrote a beautiful anthology, beautiful biography of Wes Craven. But anyway, Joe was editing it, and he did not realize at the point how hot Clay Clay is right now, and he sent him all these changes, and Clay made them without, and he wasn't, look, do you know who you're talking to here?
Right.
He
Because
was,
he's a professional.
yeah, he was gracious, and he worked through the suggestions, and, and it wound up being a cool anthology, Dark Corners of the Old Dominion.
So you mentioned that how important it is in establishing a rapport with editors and being able to meet deadlines. I'm imagining that might be something that was stressed in your previous work as a newspaper reporter. But what else? Like, was your style as a writer influenced by your work as a reporter?
Early on, it was, and I in communication arts, the classes I had newspaper writing, and they noted that newspaper writing can be very crisp, and sometimes even one sentence paragraphs and everything. And so my earlier work has some, there are even like reviewers, and I think it was a review in Mystery Scene said, there are a lot of one sentence paragraphs in this novel. So I think I was, maybe a little more Hemingway-esque early on. And then I had a phase where I, was enraptured with Faulkner. And so I was writing long sentences that
Right.
I guess, kind of broke that mold. And then, my prose style has gotten better. It's funny, with Nelfs, I think that was in my Write Like Faulkner stage. I have not looked, other than proofing it, I've not really pored over the prose in it. But, it's something I wrote many years ago. And the story goes that Mario Puzo, wrote The Godfather because he needed money. And then the movie got made and it became this big deal. He goes, if I'd known it was going to be this bigger deal, I would have written a better book.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of like, if I'd known this was going to be what took off. You kick yourself, for not being the writer then that you are now, but you can't do that. And I love, one of my students will hear me mention sometimes, if I do a video note, that I sometimes listen to the Losers Club podcast about Stephen King, because they will dissect Stephen King novels and they love them, but then they have an area called Pound Cake and they go, oh, look, Stephen King's description in this passage. I'm going, okay, if they're going to attack Stephen King, I can forgive myself. So it definitely was, writing crisp was, I think early on was a benefit of being a newspaper reporter. Sometimes I would forget, and happily they would catch it in the editing, but when you're creating a character name, you can spell it how you want to. And I would forget for some reason, and decide I'm gonna spell this guy that's spelled Baden. I think it would be more exotic if it was Bayden. And then this
Little
was
artistic license.
yeah, and this is the mayor of a town, and the editor would get it and goes, you do know how to spell Fred Baden's name, don't you? Oops, yeah, I forgot it wasn't totally in my control.
Here's a great question in the chat that I'll pass on. Knowing what you know now and how you've grown as a writer, what's the biggest advice you would have given yourself when you published your first book?
Oh, a lot. And I always have worked hard to promote and everything, and I went to cons early on. But the the more, the closer you can get a book to the stratosphere, the easier it's going to make things down the road. And so, work really hard. You're going to work really hard to get a first novel published anyway, but just work really hard to make sure it is the absolute best you can make it, and then talk about it everywhere, and go to conferences and things, and do everything you can to get it noticed. There are things that, again, you don't know what's going to take off, and you don't know. Now this is my like third book or fourth, and you don't know, what's going to be the one that really hits. But the more you can help yourself, the better. I was at a convention a number of years ago, and I had a comic book at that point called the Scary Book. But a guy named John Steakley, who is famous for the novel Armor, and he wrote the book Vampires, which I think they throw a dollar sign in there, on the S, and it was made into a movie with James Woods. John Carpenter directed it. But anyway, he was like the Toastmaster or whatever. And so, he was introducing all of the guests that were at this con. This was a coast con in Biloxi, Gulfport, Mississippi area. But anyway, he goes, "Hi, now. So what have you got going on?" I go, "Well, the newest thing I have out is a deal called the Scary Book." He said, "The Scary Book, you say? That it's called the Scary Book?" Yeah, yeah, the Scary Book. Okay, the Scary Book. And he just repeated it, and he told me, he goes, "And that's what you do. You know, you push, you say it over and over, you make people remember it." And so, write as good as you can, and then promote as, with all your heart. And that will put the wind in your sails.
And I guess that's advice that goes as much for self-publishing as traditional publishing.
Absolutely. I would say, with self-publishing, make sure it's error-free, as error-free as you can get it. There's always going to be something, but there's some joke going around that, how do you know you're a professional writer? Well, you have discovered a typo that is now beyond your control, that is out there somewhere. But get an editor. You're not going to catch everything yourself. So if you're self-publishing, there are good editors out there, and good copy editors, and but yeah, make it the best you can. And there are even, more rules for self-publishers, because it behooves you to be, prolific. John Hartness, who you may have heard of, he has a press called Falstaff Books, and is also a writer himself. And he has a couple of series, and they were a couple of years ago, Whoopi Goldberg mentioned one of them on The View when they were doing like their Christmas gift recommendations or whatever, and discovered that Whoopi Goldberg loves, his work. But he writes, like, I think, a short novel a quarter for his fans. And so, there are a lot of expectations if you're going to be really successful self-published. And I should probably write Cy Reardon books faster than I do, but I've written a couple, and I think the third one I'm working on. I'm in the outline stage on it, but I probably should take my own advice and turn those out a little quicker.
So you mentioned like you're working on the third Cy Reardon book now, working on the outline. What's your process for writing a book? Do you write it like a detailed outline first and then start writing the book itself?
Basically, yes. I was a pure pantser or discovery writer for especially for my first book. I sat down and wrote. I've had conversations years ago now with Joe Lansdale, who is very much a discovery writer. And I wish I could remember, because I share this with students frequently, but I wish I could remember who told him that, he said, your first, the way he works is sit down, write, turn it out. And they told him, your first draft is your outline. It's a very, very detailed outline in that approach. The thing about, pure discovery writing is there's a lot of rewriting because, things, you wind up with, okay, that didn't work. I need to go back and fix that. And so, I have learned it's easier to, do some of that in the outline stage. And I was fortunate back in the day, after I sold my first novel, I could sell the next novels with an outline and sample chapters. And kind of reached a point where, things shifted enough that they wanted complete manuscripts again. But that got me into outlining. And with Fool's Run is the first book. And I started that, I had written years ago it started out to be with Caliber Press, but I wrote a comic called Marauder, and it wound up being published by Silverline, which is a imprint of actually a guy I met at cons, and he worked for Malibu Graphics back in the day, which they had, cartoons and all at that time. But anyway, it started out as like a novel using my character, the Marauder, and my comic book character, and I realized there was a twist, and there was more that I could do with it. And actually, as part of a writing group, I worked through that first novel, and there was an outline, but then the first draft changed some things. And what happened with that first novel is I kind of created the template for side novels, because there will be certain beats that kind of suit Cy's approach, because he starts out maybe with one mission and something carries him into something different. And of course, you have to make this look organic. But with the first book, I kind of set the template, and so that guided me in the second book. And I know all of the major beats for the third book now. I know where he's going to go, and some things like that. And I kind of thought we were going to take a trip to Europe, and we probably are, at some point. But if I had taken a new trip to Europe, he might go to some different places. Now he may go to places I've already been, because I do like to, have been to, quote unquote exotic locales. And happily, the plot is flexible enough that he can go where I have some familiarity.
Are these like first person hard boiled novel type narratives?
They are. He tells his own story, and I have kind of a voice for Cy. You have to look back at him, to kind of recapture his voice when you've been away from it for a little while. But yeah, I talked about those trunk novels, and my young reporter character that I didn't feel like I was doing anything new with. Cy, kind of I came back to that realm, but he's a little bit different guy. He is a cop who went to prison, which in Louisiana, they have like a particular unit in North Louisiana, the David Wade area of a prison, for law enforcement and, judges, anybody that is, excuse me, ever put people in prison. They put them there so that, they're not 1,000 people out to kill them. So he has done time, and has some connections with criminals that were in protective custody. And so he is a bit of a rogue, and gets out of prison, and kind of segues into doing some detective style work, and actually solves more of a cold case in the second book. But yeah, very much mirroring harnessing the flavor of Raymond Chandler, and
Right,
a little bit of John D. McDonald.
bit of an homage.
Yes, yes, yes.
How do you develop the voice? How do you know that you found the voice of a narrator, first person narrator?
I really was doing it and also just kind of keeping the language very pared down. Like instead of doing it of the of the book, do the book, cutting out the prepositional phrases and all, and just making his language very crisp and kind of matter of fact. But I was in a writers group, and that was part of what was driving the creation of Fool's Run. And uh, I, uh, as I start getting feedback, people going, "Well, wow, the voice is great," or I don't know if they were actually saying voice, but they were saying this is so well written or whatever, the crisp, and so I go, okay, well, I guess I am doing something there. I think, like with a lot of writing, a lot of it we internalize so much, and I've read as a reader, enjoyed many, 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 hard-boiled tales, and so I think probably you're channeling a little bit too.
Yeah. Melissa, do you have a last question? Oh, yeah.
I guess I don't. I think I got them all answered. Oh, I do. Sidney, you talked about how reading books has taught you to become a writer. And I was wondering, do you read books with a pen and a highlighter in your hand and commit the transgression of writing in these mentor tests? How
I
do you do
don't.
it?
I don't mark up books, although I used to much more, but I used to have a notebook where I wrote down phrases I really, really liked, really, really great phrases. And I picked up Deliverance not long ago after not having, looked at it for years. And, you know, Dickey's prose is so wonderful. The first page of that, he is unfolding, they're unfolding a map, but he describes that in such a beautiful way, and that book, to be as brutal as it is, is very beautifully written. And I think you do internalize things like that, but I have not consciously go, I'm going to do that, but just I think it's more of an absorption. And if you read enough, and then if you take a MFA course or whatever, and you start to see beats defined and things like that, you go, oh, okay, yeah, I've seen that happen. I see what they're talking about. It's kind of like it, and the instruction gives you the labels for what you
Mhm.
have observed, and it also lets you see. I talked about find good editors. It also lets you spot editors that are just purely paradigm driven, and are not bringing any intuition or artistry to a critique. And so I don't mark up, but I do work really hard to absorb.
Well, folks, on that note, um, our Wireside chat for September has to come to a close. I want to thank everybody for coming, Sidney especially. Sidney's new book, A Disturbance of Shadows, will be coming out in 2025. When in 2025? Do you
We
know
do
that yet?
not don't have a date yet. Crossroad has they are reissuing. Speaking of reissuing, they're reissuing some books by Ronald Kelly, and those are keeping them busy right now.
Okay.
And so we have not figured out the slot that it will go into yet.
But is it ready to go?
Well, it is written and turned in. It's not
Okay.
has not been edited yet.
Okay. Well, I wish you the
I
best.
just finished it a few weeks ago, so
Oh, okay. So now you're between projects, as they say.
yes, yes.
Um, so anyway, I wish you the best of luck with that. And thank you again for coming. And thanks everyone for coming. And we'll see you next time. Thanks,
Thank you very
Melissa,
much.
for you.